Hi everyone, and welcome to today's lecture for English QCE Units 3 and 4. Thank you for joining me today. My name's Jasmine and I'm the tutor who will be taking you through the discussion of today's material. As a little bit of background on me, I graduated school in 2022. I took English, as pretty much everyone does. I also took English and Literature Extension. And I graduated with an ATAR of 98.85. I recently completed a Bachelor of Nutrition at UniSC, and I'm looking forward to continuing my studies this year into a research pathway with my honours. So, also before we get into the material, I do want to just add a quick note about ATAR Notes, who are the ones who are delivering the lecture today. And they have been delivering live lectures like this since 2015 and delivering free resources for students just like you since 2007. And the lectures really align with what ATAR Notes set out to do, which is to help and to support students as best they can with a bunch of free resources. And just to give you a glimpse of those, these are all available through the ATAR Notes website. So you've done something right today. You've found the lectures. Very nicely done. And I hope you get a lot out of our lecture today. There's lots of other lectures on and recordings that you can access. But there's also shorter videos that might just cover one topic and be a couple of minutes long. I definitely used these during high school. It can be nice just to have a short snippet of a topic. There's also the newsletter which you can choose to receive to your email, and it will highlight things like some of the articles that ATAR Notes put out, and these can be really helpful to illuminate different study strategies and tips for grade 12 that you might not be aware of, or sometimes you get caught up in your own habits and need to do something new and fresh to keep going through year 12. It's a long time, I understand. I've done it just like you. There also is a lot of study notes, hundreds of study notes for different subjects. There is a free ATAR calculator. Obviously, we can't trust it 100%, but it's great to see if you're around the right track that you're hoping for. There's online discussion panels on the ATAR Notes website and lots of other things, so go check it out. It's a great place to have an explore. If you're looking for support above and beyond these free resources, there is also ATAR Notes Plus, where it's basically a huge pool of resources, extra resources, amazing resources. I used ATAR Notes Plus in year 12. And I really recommend it. There's text guides that go through all of the analysis for different books you might be studying in English and different plays. There's course notes that take you through the different assessments and course material of your QCE subjects. There's topic test books, and there's practice exams, great things to do in the lead up to externals. I know we're not quite there yet, but good things to keep in mind as you are preparing this year. If you're looking for personalised study support, I am a tutor at TuteMax. There's lots of other tutors like myself at TuteMax. We're all recent graduates, and we run one-on-one sessions with students giving really individualised support. You might be coming into a session looking for better skills to develop your English analysis, or maybe it's how to write more cohesively, or maybe it's how do I approach studying for my unseen external exam for English at the end of the year, or maybe it's an assignment for English that you bring in and you want some feedback on. We do all of that and provide really individualized support for you as students. So also great things to have in mind, ATAR Notes Plus and TuteMax tutoring to make sure you feel fully supported and capable in grade 12. getting into our actual lecture for today, which we know is QCE English, Units 3 and 4. And what we're going to do today is kind of cover a snapshot of the whole year, but I'll be focusing on Unit 3, specifically on your IA2, because it's a little bit of an odd assessment, and hopefully we can get our heads around it today and feel confident when you need to approach this task. Before I go any further, I also want to mention that we have broken it into the 4 topics for today. We're starting with the IA1. Some of you might already have been working on this. So we're going to go through it, but we're not going to spend all our time on that. As I said, the focus will be on that topic 2, your IA2, the essay for a public audience. Then topic 3, the creative response, is your IA3. It's in exam conditions, but you can prepare for this task very well, very efficiently. And we're going to talk about base texts and writing good creative responses. Topic 4, looking all the way ahead to the external exam, but being realistic, like what can you do now to help you feel prepared for that external exam in the future? I did say the dreaded words, external exam, and I'm sure that it's kind of a fearful topic for lots of you. You're going to ace it, do not worry, but I completely appreciate that there's probably some things that you have concerns or worries, or maybe even things you're looking forward to this year in English. So I want you to just take a minute to note them down. Grab pen and paper or a blank Google Doc, or even grab your notes app in your phone, and just note down some things that you have thoughts about or concerns about. Maybe it's the external exam, the dreaded external. Maybe it's having to read a really long book or a Shakespeare play. Maybe you're just not keen for this subject at all. Hopefully we can have some fun with it today and you feel a little bit better. But write those things down. I'll give you a couple of moments for that. Write down whatever comes to mind. Maybe you've got some goals for the year, or you'd like to set a goal for the year. And that doesn't have to be a score. That can be, I want to become better at analytical writing. Some of those concerns, think about maybe, is there a way that's helped you in the past to work on or improve in that area? That's worth jotting down as well. So that's been about a minute, so we're going to move on, but hopefully it's just giving you space to collect your thoughts about this subject and the year to come. And hopefully we can address some of those concerns of yours in this lecture today. English is a journey. It may feel like this year is a bit of a sprint. It's very intense, year 12, but you've come a long way in your English journey. Thinking back all the way from prep when you were learning how to write your letters and spell words. You've done so many English classes. You have already done 2 units of senior English, units 1 and 2, so you have a foundation. You've read dozens of books, analysed so many poems, written speeches for your class, read so many stories. Think about all those short stories that you would have read in primary school, and then all the novels you've read in high school. You've analysed so many words. You are more prepared than you think for this unit of English. Regardless, it's probably still feeling a bit daunting or overwhelming, but keep a positive mindset. That is really key in grade 12 here, that you stay positive, and don't get weighed down even when you have setbacks. Keep looking forward, and try not to get stuck in that feeling. Keep positive. Break your task down into little goals that you can achieve, and that feel manageable. Sometimes, writing a whole speech doesn't feel manageable. Writing an introduction, though, that might be a little bit more approachable of a task. Take breaks in your study. It's very important. Maintain your support system, those people around you who keep you happy and energized and positive about life. Give yourself rewards. So when you achieve those little goals that we were talking about, give yourself some kind of reward and just believe in your ability to do this. What does our journey this year look like? So you've probably already started this journey. Lots of schools start Unit 3 last year in 2025 in Term 4. So you probably already have a head start on this journey through Units 3 and 4. The first assessment now is your spoken persuasive response. We're going to spend a little bit of time on that shortly. Then we're going to focus on your IA2, which is a written response for a public audience. It's a bit ambiguously worded, but what that means is you're writing like an article or a blog post or a column. It's balancing the lines of formality and making a conversation that actually is enjoyable to read and to write. Your IA3 is a scene task, but it's under exam conditions. It's a creative response to a written text. We're going to talk about that one and how to springboard off your base text that you studied in class into your creative response and how to write a really strong creative response. Finally, your one external assessment, the analytical exam. You'll be diving deep into your analysis for a particular text, and that is your chance, that is your foundation for this exam. You have all the knowledge about the text. You've spent hours and hours analysing that text. So you are familiar with it inside and out, and you can go into that exam feeling prepared in that regard. You know your text. Across these 4 tasks, the weighting is equal, so they're all worth 25% of your mark. If you are really not into, persuasive oral speeches, then maybe you can bolster your mark up with your IA2. Maybe you're more into that writing and intrigued by the tone that you're going to create in your IA2. But these are all tasks that you've done before. So you would have done some version of these tasks in Units 1 and 2 last year. You are prepared. You're going to feel even more prepared after this lecture. So let's jump into it with this content around your IA1. And something very central to persuasive writing is these 3 techniques of logos, pathos, and ethos. What do I mean by these? I'm sure you've come across these words. Logos is an appeal to logic, so I always remember that because logic sounds and looks a bit like the word logos, right? So what we're doing here is we're using facts and statistics and really clear explanations in our writing and speaking, given that this is an oral task, to show the reader why your argument makes sense. So they're going to agree with you because they think you're logical. They think you're credible. They think that you know your stuff. Pathos is an emotional appeal. So this is when I love pointing out TV ads that are really pathos, because there's lots of commercials that are for really random items, and they'll just use pathos so strongly because they'll associate an emotion to the product or to the experience. So for an example, there is an insurance ad out there at the moment where there's you might know it, there's a bird and it drops its egg and it's storming, and the audience starts to feel worried. They're like, oh my goodness, that tiny little bird, it's dropped its egg, and then a big eagle comes in and saves the bird and its egg and takes them to their nest. And apparently that's what insurance does. So you can see how we're being drawn in by the emotions that the text or the commercial or the speech is creating. So this is not so much about being factual, but about how you use your language to create emotion. And it doesn't have to be a sad emotion either. You can associate a product or experience with being happy and being social. We see that with a lot of soft drink companies. They'll have their soft drinks in the center of like a big party or a picnic, and everyone's really happy and fun, and there's sunny weather, and we can see how in the same way we're getting drawn in by the emotion that the piece creates. Finally, ethos is an ethical appeal. So this is when we're saying my argument should be accepted because it's what is morally right. So an example of this, if I'm making speech, really boring speech, wouldn't recommend it for your IA1. I'm making a speech about why we should save the turtles. Not very controversial, but serves our purpose here. My ethos argument would be that it is not just and fair for innocent baby turtles to die because of light pollution. So what I'm saying to you is, it's not ethical. It's unethical for these turtles to be dying just because of something in the man-made world. So this is ethos and how we use ethos in our arguments. Before you start writing your IA1, if you haven't started this task yet, on your task sheet, you should identify the context for your speech. So it's likely you'll have been given a hypothetical situation that you're speaking for. It might be like a youth forum or a youth conference. So you should know who you're talking to. If it's just a youth audience, that's important to acknowledge and use to tailor your speech around the fact that you're talking to young people. So if your audience in your task sheet is just young people, then you can, for example, make some references or use some phrases like, as the next generation stewards of our planet, we need to act on climate change. Again, very boring call to action, but you see my point. We're tailoring it into our audience. And where you are speaking will also impact your introduction and the way you introduce yourself. What persona are you taking on as the speaker at this hypothetical event? So what topics are you considering speaking about, and how is the topic contentious? So I've been giving really boring examples that most people would agree should be acted upon. Climate change is a bit iffy, but most people are going to agree that we should save the turtles, right? Not a lot of people are going to say no. So it's not really a contentious issue, a controversial issue. And that's what you want in your speech, to be able to provide a nuanced response. You don't want to just be arguing for something that everybody agrees on already, because that's not very exciting. Hopefully you've got some topics on mind. Maybe you have been given a topic already. What do you want the audience to do about it? So this is your call to action. You need to know, what are you asking your audience to act on, believe, what should they change their thoughts on at the end of your speech? There needs to be something that you're asking your audience to do. And as you look into the topics, the potential topics you might be doing, or if you've chosen your topic, conduct some research so that you've got some factual statements to support your speech. This is your logos. This is your logical appeal. So we need some evidence and research in that speech to make this logical appeal. The structure of the persuasive speech. We want to start with a hook. This is hooking in the audience, the listeners. So we want to immediately make clear our topic, but we want to make it really interesting. So you can liken this to a sizzling start in a short story. So you want to start with a bang, start with something that really grabs the audience's attention. This might be a rhetorical question. This might be a statistic or a fact that's really, wow, I didn't know that. This might be an anecdote that is really bringing in that pathos, that emotional appeal for an anecdote, so a personal story. Or you could use a story of somebody else's that you have researched online. And you can think of it also as a teaser trailer. So if your speech was a movie, how would you provide that 20-second hook into your speech? How would you get the audience super excited to come to the cinema and see your speech when it came out? The next part of the speech is the formal introduction. So you don't want to fall into the trap of starting your speech with, hello, my name is Jasmine, and today I'm talking about why we should save the turtles. Really boring, not a good hook. You want your hook to come first, and then you'll introduce yourself, you'll introduce your name, introduce yourself within the context that you've identified in your task sheet. Do not lose that context. So acknowledge where you are, acknowledge the audience you're talking to in some way, and you're going to give a kind of thesis statement. Obviously, when you're giving an oral presentation, you don't want it to sound as formal and dense as an analytical essay, but you still want to give a clear and concise statement of what you're going to be discussing or arguing in your speech. So this is why we've got thesis in inverted commas. So you're sharing what you're arguing in your speech, and you do want to give a bit of a preview of your arguments. So just like in any other introduction, you're trying to lead your audience into your body paragraphs, which is what we're going to look at now. Step 3 is the body of your speech. You can structure this however feels natural. You do still want to use peel paragraphs, but they might be longer peel paragraphs or shorter peel paragraphs, depending on how feels the different points that you want to make, the different sub-arguments that you're making about your topic. And you want to make sure they feel really smooth and have a good flow as you talk through them. So you want to use those topic sentences of appeal, or teal, some people call it. Or you can think of this as signposting. So giving a street sign at the start of your paragraph, this is what my paragraph is going to talk about. You're telling the audience really clearly. You can also, as you go through your speech, use some connective words so that your next paragraph connects to the argument in the previous paragraph, and this helps to create that flow that I was talking about. So you should be detailing what the problem that you're posing in your point is. So you should have these kind of different sub-arguments that give more detail on that thesis statement that you introduced at the start of your introduction. And you have to convince people why they should care. So why should people care about the turtles? Is that ethos, is that ethical appeal going to make them care about the turtles? So use examples. This is where you bring in your ethos, pathos, and logos, and I encourage you to balance these throughout your speech. So students often find that there's one that they're more comfortable with, and you might be inclined to use that one more, but try to balance using different appeals to these three things: ethics, emotion, and logic throughout your speech, so that you're giving a really well-rounded perspective. And make sure that you're tying your sub-arguments back to your thesis statement or stance from the introduction. We'll give a pause for a moment. I'm going to have a sip of water. Let that sink in. Think about if you have any questions. Feel free to ask them. So this is the bulk of your speech, your sub-arguments. And then this is leading into the call to action. The call to action can be a little bit longer than a normal conclusion. You're adding new content because this is where you're asking the reader, or the audience I should say, of a speech, what do you want them to do about it? It's all good and well to argue about something, for or against a topic, but you need to then inspire them to act in some way. And it doesn't have to be a physical action. It can be a change in attitudes or beliefs or values, but the change that you're asking for needs to be made clear. So the light at the end of the tunnel, this is coming out of all of the problems that you've just described and showing, but there is a solution to this topic. There is a solution to the problems I've just told you about. So it is urgent, but we can solve this. If you have a large audience, remembering that your task sheet should tell you who your audience is, who are you talking to, you can kind of break them into subsections or groups. So if it's a very general audience, you might want to tailor parts of your message to students in particular, or parents, or business owners, or women in STEM. Maybe my argument is about providing a more localized food supply. So I'm going to ask business owners to source more local produce to include in their menus. So my business owners would be like restaurant owners, cafe owners, maybe even some like hotel owners who have buffet breakfast in their hotel, for example. I'm asking those the owners of those businesses to source more local food from local producers to put in their menu. And in my sub-arguments, I would have told them why they should be doing this. So the emotional appeal, the logic behind it, the ethics behind it. So they're feeling pretty convinced they should do that now. You also need to provide your conclusion in this section. So there's kind of that dual purpose. This is a call to action, but you also need to wrap up and summarize your speech. So make sure that you restate or reiterate your stance or your thesis statement from your introduction. Don't just copy paste it. Give it a little bit of a tweak. Maybe there's some extra detail that you can add now that you have described all of your sub-arguments. And make sure you write a really strong closing line that is impactful on the audience. So put yourself in the audience's shoes. If you're listening to a speech that closes with a really kind of soft statement like turtles are beautiful animals, thank you for listening to my speech, it's not hard hitting. And that's also about your delivery and the content of the sentence. So if I change that sentence to turtles are essential to the ecosystem and we must act to save them, thank you for listening, there's a little bit more impact to that statement. So really grab hold of your audience and keep them interested. I'm sure that you have all heard these persuasive techniques over and over, so I'm just going to give them a quick revision. Some of these are also aesthetic or structural features that are great to know for analysing text as well, so they are useful, really useful. Starting with imagery or figurative language, this is where you're using your descriptive language to paint a really vivid image of what you're describing to your audience, so they should be able to visualize what you're describing. You might be using similes or metaphors or analogies to do this, or it might just be really well employed descriptive language, so adjectives. And you're going to see that in this example. Excessive logging has created smouldering, charred, lifeless wastelands, home to nothing more than ash. So those three adjectives there, especially smouldering, charred, lifeless, paints a really strong and clear image in your mind. And if you can visualize the problem, you're going to connect with it better, and therefore you're more likely to agree with what the speaker is saying. Hyperbole is making exaggerations. So you're making really big statements that really emphasize the problem, and they make a dramatic impact. Rugby league players plod in gangs toward each other to thump, maul and gorge for a few centimetres of turf. So we've kind of over-exaggerated the violence and almost Neanderthal-like primitiveness and savageness of this game. And it really does make a dramatic impact, I think. It's not always the strongest, especially if you're going for a logical appeal. It's not always 100% correct, but it can have a good emotional impact. Rhetorical questions, and I flagged these earlier to use in your introduction. They can be helpful there, but you can dot these throughout your speech if they have a purpose. You don't want to use too many. Don't just make a whole speech worth of rhetorical questions. But you're asking the audience a question which is specifically phrased to lead them to one particular answer. So if I turn my earlier statement into a question, do you think it's fair that innocent baby turtles are dying because of man-made light pollution? It's a little bit strange if somebody thought it was fair that innocent baby turtles are dying, so you're leading your audience towards agreeing with your stance. How much longer will it take for us to see the truth? How many more people have to get hurt? So these rhetorical questions here, obviously the moral and correct societal thing is that we don't want to see people hurt, we shouldn't be, we want to expose the truth. These are values of our society, so we're leading the audience towards the answer that we agree with, essentially. So it's challenging the audience to agree with the argument and encouraging them to take the same stance as you. Repetition, so repeating almost anything in your speech. So you could repeat your argument. Don't just write this. That doesn't mean you're not writing the same argument all through your speech, but repeating a key phrase which becomes almost like the catchphrase or the motto of your speech. You can repeat some imagery, you could repeat expert evidence, you could repeat emotional appeals, emotive language, you could repeat big statements, that hyperbole. So, and often an effective strategy is to repeat with the rule of three or rule of thirds. So you're doing it 3 times and it just sounds really appealing and effective. So I've got an example here. We should not stand idly aside. We should act to protect the turtles. We should act now. So not only have I repeated the we should, and they're all short sentences, I've also used inclusive language there. So the word we brings myself as the speaker and you as the audience together as a collective who are going to act on this issue. So the audience just effectively feels like they belong in this group and to act for this cause. And using this repetition can emphasize key parts of your argument. It's going to help your audience to remember them and to link sections of your argument together. Finally, presenting your speech. I know that lots of people do not like presenting their speech. It can be a bit nerve-wracking, especially if you have to do it in front of your whole class. So here are some of my top tips. Firstly, make sure you know your speech. Speak your speech from the start. While you're drafting it, write your introduction, speak it aloud. See how it feels. Are there sentences that feel awkward or too long, or vocabulary that you're not really confident pronouncing? You might need to practice it, or you might need to find a word that is more comfortable to you. Know your topic and your script inside out. Practice where you're going to make emphasis to things. Practice your gesture. You can see I really talk with my hands, but intentional movements during your speech might help to lower the chance of those little nervous fidgets like scratching the head or picking the fingers, which is ideal for how professional your speech comes across. So use your hands, use some gestures, like if you're talking about firstly, and then you can go secondly. So you use these gestures which are intimately linked with what you're speaking. You can, on one hand, but on the other hand, those type of gestures that fit with your speech really well. I would encourage you to use palm cards for your speech so that you're not holding your whole script. And you can even mark your gestures into your palm cards. You can say, you might want to have some code count here in a specific color so that it flags in your mind, I need to do my gesture there. Practice speaking it aloud, but practice speaking it in front of people or a pet if you don't have somebody that you want to talk in front of. Totally understand, but stand up, practice your speech like you're speaking in your class, use your palm cards, practice your gestures. You might want to get some feedback if you're happy to do it in front of peers who know the assessment topic, or if you're doing it in front of your tutor, and you can get some feedback on the way that you're presenting. Are you engaging with the audience? A method that I have used in the past to help memorize written text is to record myself saying them and then listen to them a bunch back. So it's a great way to get to know your script better, and it means that you can do stuff at the same time. Maybe it's some chores at home and you can just listen to yourself over and over doing your speech. Maybe try and speak along with some of the parts that you've nearly learnt. It's also going to get your emphasis and tone and pace in your head if you do practice all those things when you record them, so that you're listening to all of those little nuances when you're listening back. And that is what I'm talking about here. You should vary your tone and your pace when you speak your speech. And that's how you create interest. So if I did this whole presentation at this speed and this tone, you'd all be really bored, I think. I know I would have been as a student. So hopefully you can hear, just in the way that I talk, I speed up, I slow down and emphasize parts that are important. So match your voice to the emotions of your speech, take pauses, speak with really good diction, so speak all your syllables really clearly. Your teacher's going to be looking out for that, because that means they can understand you well. And practice that. Practice varying your tone and pace through your speech. Finally, another tip for practice in front of the mirror or record, like video record yourself doing your speech. That way you can give yourself feedback. You can listen back and go, oh my gosh, I talked really fast then. I need to slow down. Or, I need to take a pause there. That wasn't very effective when I asked my rhetorical question and I didn't take a pause. Maybe you're not using your facial expressions enough. All those kind of things you can pick up in the mirror or if you record yourself on your phone, so very much recommend doing that. Just going to pause on that slide for a moment. That is all we're talking about for today on our IA1. If you have any questions, please ask them. Otherwise, we'll move on to IA2. Okay, I hope you're feeling better about your IA1 if you haven't presented yet. Hopefully those are some tips that you can really use and maximize when you present your oral, and good luck with it. I really hope you do well. The IA2, written response for a public audience. We're trademarking this as the public essay. And it's probably going to feel kind of unfamiliar and challenging. It's a bit of a strange task, and that's why we're going to spend quite a bit of time on it now today. Some of the reasons it might feel challenging is because the word count can be up to 1,500 words. You'll be analysing two texts and comparing them in your response. You have to find, or maybe you'll be told, a concept that is represented in both texts, and that's what you'll be discussing in your response. And you also have to write in the style of a conversational public essay, article, blog, or column. So a big tip I would have when you're coming up to this task, maybe you've just finished your oral and you've got some extra time to start studying English, have a read of public essays. Go on the conversation. It's a very approachable place where experts write. They write about their expert topic, but they write in a way that is approachable for the public audience, which is exactly what you want to do in this. And you'll see that the tone balances between making it a conversation between the author and the reader, but also still being really in-depth and a level of formality. It still has a slightly academic tone, but it's a little bit lighter and more conversational than a normal essay. You want it to be an interesting read, essentially. So once you have started looking at your IA2 texts in class, what should you do? Disregard the fact that there's two texts. Just start reading and watching your text as usual. So something about this task is that usually you'll have two texts that are different types. So you might have a novel and a film, or a novel and a play, or a film and a play. So you're going to have texts that are different types of texts. So you might be watching a film, reading a novel. That's what I did for my IA2. It's kind of good you get to watch a movie in class. But you might need to read and watch these more than once, especially if you have a movie or a play that you're watching, because you need to make observations about the techniques that they use in the movie. For example, you need to make observations and note these down. Maybe note them with timestamps. Around 55 minutes, the use of colour was very notable. We're going to go through some film techniques today as well, so hopefully that will help you to identify some of those moments in the film where something interesting is going on with the film technique. analyze your text separately, just like you normally would. So look at the themes and the concepts, the characters, the setting, both the time period and the geographical setting. Look at these things and look at how they're represented in the text. As you do that, identify the techniques. These might be literary or film techniques or stage techniques or poetic techniques that contribute to creating the representation. So that evidence for, while you're saying love is represented as yada yada yada, why? Those techniques are your why and how the representation is created. Then you can take your two texts and compare them. Think about it as a Venn diagram. What are the similarities and the differences in the way that both texts represent the same concept? I've got an example on the next slide, so hopefully that will make more sense in a moment. And then pinpointing, we're taking that funnel all the way down to what perspective are you going to discuss in your piece, because you need to provide a perspective and contribute to the conversation around the text that you're analysing in your IA2 public essay. Alright, I promised I had an example. It's a bit of a random fun one because I wanted to keep it super light and fun today. So I'm looking at the concept of love is my concept that's in both texts. I've got my Venn diagram. My film is Disney's Frozen, and my novel is Pride and Prejudice. And I was looking at what are the similarities and what are the differences in how love is represented in this film and this novel. In the middle, of my Venn diagram, where my circles overlap, I've got romantic love has moral value. I'm gonna try to annotate. So we've got romantic love has moral value. With Pride and Prejudice, I was thinking that you've got Darcy and Elizabeth, and they learn a lot of lessons and develop as people as they get to know each other and fall in love with each other. So there's a bit of a moral lesson to be learned there that pertains to the title, because Darcy learns to be less arrogant and prideful, and Elizabeth learns not to judge people on first appearances. So there's moral value to their love. Then looking at Frozen, I'm thinking of Anna and Kristoff. Anna kind of starts off thinking, you can fall in love at first sight, and she's going to marry a guy that she only just met, but then she gets to know Kristoff and learns that love is something that grows between people. She grows as a person throughout their adventures. She gets more brave. She grows in her empathy for her sister, I would say. So there's moral value there. Another similarity between the two texts would be the strength of family love in both of these. So both of them have a pair of sisters where their bond is really, really strong, and that sister bond is really important to the story and the representation of love. So in Pride and Prejudice, this is Elizabeth and Jane. Is that right? Gosh, haven't read it for a couple of months. Do not quote me if that is not correct. I'm sure I've got some fans out there going, oh, she did not name the correct character then. But yes, pair of sisters, we've got Anna and Elsa, pair of sisters who learn about the power of love. Then look at the differences. And I haven't gone super in depth here, there's a lot more I could develop out, but this is a really broad look at what you can do. For Pride and Prejudice, I've written that love is powerful enough to overcome societal obstacles. So there's a commentary on the class system that Austen writes into Pride and Prejudice, where she's saying that because there is genuine romantic love between Elizabeth and Darcy, they seem to overcome the difference in their class, because Darcy is has a lot of higher class. He's a lot wealthier. He has a higher status than Elizabeth, and that's made really clear in the novel. But yes, they're still able to fall in love and get married, so love is powerful enough to overcome societal obstacles. And then in Frozen, there's a difference about self-love, loving and accepting your own identity, and this comes through Elsa's character. If we think about the cinematic moment of Let It Go, the power of that soundtrack, so we're starting to think now about our film techniques. It's all about like listening to who you are and embracing that, not trying to hide your identity anymore. And I think that's a really beautiful part of the representation of love in Frozen. So hopefully this example shows and has been a little bit of fun, bit of a Disney nerd, that you can bring together the similarities and differences in your two texts for IA2 to show how they represent the same concept. Let me just turn off my pen. There we go. Film techniques. I told you it was coming. So the first film technique I'm going to touch on is the shot width. So the first thing you'll want to be able to do is identify them, but then you need to be able to explain why they are used. It's not enough just to identify them in your IA2, you need to explain their purpose. So I can give you a couple of examples here. With our close-up shot, this is used a lot in films. I watch a lot of period dramas. There's lots of close-up shots where, or even extreme close-ups, where the director really wants the audience to see the emotions and the intricacy of the acting that the character or the actor is depicting. So it's often to highlight those emotional moments and the subtleties of that acting. An extreme long shot, or a long shot even, can situate the character or object within the setting. So they're often used to establish the scene, or toward the start of the scene at least, to show you where the character is, and then that might be important to know how the character is going to behave, for example. So if a character's out, I'm going to go for historical period dramas again. If a character is out at a ball, they might behave differently to if they are at home with close family. And that extreme long shot or long shot is going to show you where they are, so you can contextualize how they are behaving. Some good examples of how you would talk about the purpose of the shot width. Very similar but still different is the camera angle. So we can have any of these shot widths, but with different camera angles. Talk about some common purposes again. A low camera angle can be used to make a character or a setting or an object look bigger than it is, and therefore powerful or looming or daunting. So maybe it's when a character, all my examples are historical period dramas. I'm really sorry. Maybe it's when a character walks up to a huge mansion and you get that low angle shot that amplifies the enormity of the building and makes it seem even more terrifying from the perspective of the character. Opposite of that, a high angle shot looks down on the character or object or setting. So not directly from above, but from an angle. So this might be looking down at a child from an adult's point of view, and you're seeing how small the child looks, how insignificant, how powerful the perspective of the adult looks down at the child. Just an example there of the purpose. A bird's eye view can show the character in their setting. So it's directly above the character. The camera is up here. Could be used when, there we go, there's a different example. Maybe it's a fantasy or adventure movie and they're running through a particular setting. So you just get that above the bird's eye view of the character transversing their environment, their physical environment. And you really see how they're tracking through that environment. Diegetic and non-diegetic sound, I'll quickly overview what they are and then some questions you can ask. Diegetic sound is all of the sound that is recorded while the scene is being recorded as well, or while the scene is being shot. So stuff like the characters talking, if somebody knocks on the door, that's diegetic sound if it's in real time. If there's background characters clapping in real time, that is diegetic sound. Non-diegetic sound is everything added, you can think of it as post-production, everything added after the recording or the shot has been filmed. So things like narration, things like music, sound effects. That's why like knocking sounds or clapping sounds can be hard to tell if they're diegetic or non-diegetic, because you don't know if it's a sound effect or if it was recorded in the original shot sometimes. But non-diegetic sounds that we often focus on, big sound effects, narration, music, these all contribute to the mood. So if we ask some questions about these then, that will help you analyze them, not just identify them, but we analyze them and we talk about their purpose. So what is communicated through the way that the characters talk? Does it reflect their mood and or their environment? So you could take the example from earlier where I was talking about a character in at a ball in a big fancy setting versus character at home. They're probably going to talk differently, and that reflects their closeness and their relationship with the characters around them and the societal expectation on them. Are there characters is it a teenager in a movie with their parents versus with their friends, and what does that tell you about them, the way that they talk to their parents or their friends? The next question, looking at non-diegetic sound, how do the music or sound effects contribute to the mood or message being conveyed? So is the music a bit melancholic and quiet, or is it really loud and dramatic, or is it quite lilting and happy? And how does that contribute to the message that the director is creating through that moment in the film? Same with sound effects, especially in more like fantasy and action movies. If big sound effects are being used, is that to heighten the sense of fear and overwhelm, and maybe make the enemy appear even more powerful over the protagonists and their friends. And then another question you can ask is whether there's a voiceover or narration that connects the story together. There's been a few movies and TV series I've watched where there's a narration that provides some extra context. So you've got to think about the difference between a book and a film. A book can provide you a lot more detail because you get the inner thoughts of the protagonist. If you're looking at first person writing, you're getting their inner monologue. What are they thinking all the time? Versus in a film, you don't really get that, but you might get it through a narration, or the narration might be like an omniscient narrator who knows everything that's going on all the time, so they can connect some of the things that you're seeing, maybe help you to understand the story better. Just going to take a quick break. Make sure you're thinking about or asking any questions that you have. When you're looking at analysing film techniques, it can also be worth noting the props and costumes, as this can reveal information about the characters and settings. The director can imply things, so if we see a man in a collared shirt with a briefcase, we probably assume he's a businessman going to or leaving his workplace. That's kind of implied through the costume and props. You can look at the lighting and colour used in different scenes and moments in the film or TV series or staging, and as these contribute to the mood of that moment, and they also can contribute to the representation of concepts. So if we have really warm, soft, warm lighting, it might contribute to a positive feeling in the reader, so they're going to feel whatever's happening in the movie is probably going to be cast in a positive light. Whatever they're seeing, they're going to interpret it in that positive way. Same with colour. So if there's a shot with lots of bright colours, maybe that's really kind of joyous and chaotic and setting the mood there. I also think of scenes with really low lighting, and maybe that's amplifying the fear or confusion or anxiousness of the character. Maybe they're on the run, or they're hiding from somebody, or they don't know what's going on, something strange has just happened. I think lots of horror movies have got that dark lighting, setting the mood of the moment. Finally, looking at body language and facial expressions. So the actors are making very intentional choices about how they appear on screen, the facial expressions that they provide for the character, the body language. So if it's very formal, or if they're kind of slumped in their chair, what does that say about their character? Or what does that say about the interaction between characters that they're having? Is it a positive one? Is it a negative one? Is there some nuance there? So there's a lot you can get from these aspects of the film. We can also look at some stage techniques briefly in case you're looking at a play. You might be reading it, you might be watching it. It's a bit of a 50-50. If you're reading the play, you will see stage directions. So these are breaks in the dialogue, and they're used to communicate. The playwright is saying, this is what I want to happen on stage at this moment. So it might be character exiting or entering, and it's really key to note these. Sometimes when you're reading a play, if you're not used to reading plays, you might just read the dialogue and kind of skip over the stage directions, and then sometimes it doesn't make sense because suddenly a character is talking about another character and you thought that character was in the scene but they've actually exited. Sneaky stuff like that can happen, or a character can sneak on stage and listen and gain information from a conversation that they're not seeing yet. That might be described in the stage directions. We can also look at the structure of acts and scenes in a play. So a play is divided into acts, and those acts are divided into scenes. They can be of any length, so they might be really long acts. There might just be 2 acts in the play. Lots of Shakespearean plays have 5 acts with a varying number of scenes. But we're looking at how the play is broken down is there any significance to when each act and scene begins and ends? So what has the writer wanted to communicate by maybe ending Act 1 at a really dramatic point on a cliffhanger? Maybe we've just found out something really shocking about a character, or it might even be about when a character first appears on stage. And I'm thinking of Shakespeare's play Twelfth Night, where you won't do this one for your IA2, but the character Olivia is described by multiple characters early from scene 1, act 1 of the play, but she doesn't appear on stage until scene 5. That's really interesting because the characters actually learn about what she's like as a character, or at least how she's perceived as a person by all these other people around her before they actually meet her. That's a really interesting thing to think about. And then, staying on the topic of Shakespearean plays, it might be worth knowing the differences and the conventions of comedies versus tragedies. So Shakespearean comedies are usually about some kind of confusion in romantic relationships. There'll be lots of humour, lots of witty banter, and they'll usually end in weddings of the protagonists. Versus his tragedies usually use some kind of anti-hero character, somebody like Macbeth, who has a fatal flaw, and Marcia, and goes through a series of events that lead to their downfall at the end of the play. There's usually lots of deaths, lots of manipulation and scheming in the tragedies. So you can see they're very different types of plays, and you kind of know what to expect when you read one of these. Let's talk about what you're actually going to write when you've written your IA2. So let's say you've read and watched your text, you've analysed them, done your Venn diagram, worked out what your film and novel and stage techniques are in your text, and now you're ready to write. To follow the genre convention of a public audience essay, you want a title at the start of your essay. And you don't want to just say, comparing the representations of love in Disney's Frozen and Pride and Prejudice. It's a really boring title. Remember, this needs to appeal to a public audience. I'm being harsh. I say boring to myself because I have high standards of myself. You want to make your title interesting. Make it exciting. If you read the title of your IA2, would you want to read the rest of the article? That's what you should be aiming for. You might want to add a byline if it's relevant, so another short phrase under your title that further leads the reader of your essay into your topic. So I'll just show you how you would structure this. So your title is going to be up. Oh, your title is up here. Oh, why is my pen not working? Pen, there we go. Your title is up here. Your byline might be just here. You need to have somewhere where you've got your name as the author, because this is a public article. You need to have who wrote it, and that is you. But a byline would be a short phrase. It might be, can I think of a good title? Exploring the Strength of Family Love might be my title, and then my byline might say, how does Disney's Frozen and Pride and Prejudice highlight the importance of familial affection in different ways? Still not very well written, but hopefully you can see how your byline might draw your audience back down into the rest of your article. Then you have your introduction, which is similar to an essay introduction, but not quite the same. You need to introduce the central idea of your essay in a way that suits the platform or magazine that you're hypothetically writing for. Just like in your IO1, where you had a hypothetical audience or event that you were speaking to, in your IA2, you might be given a hypothetical, might be imaginary, platform or magazine that you're writing your essay for. And you should find something similar. There might be something in your task sheet. It might say something like, you're writing for Queensland Literary Magazine. The audience is comprised of general public who are interested in literary analysis. So you're still writing for a public audience, but you can make your tone a little bit more intellectual because your task sheet has told you that you're writing for people who are interested in what you have to say. They're interested in literary stuff. Versus if you had a platform that was something more along the lines of the conversation, very public facing, very, very broad audience, not just people who are interested in English, but basically anyone is the audience of that platform. So then you need to provide a more approachable introduction to hook that idea of hooking the reader into your topic. So you need to provide an entry point that your audience are going to be like, oh yeah, that sounds really interesting. That introduction is relatable and relevant to me. That's the start of your introduction. Going further into your introduction, you do still need to introduce your two texts and the author or director of both texts. Give your thesis. This won't be as formal as a traditional essay thesis though, because we're needing to get that balance between formality and conversation. So what I suggest is that you write your first draft of your IA2, just get your ideas onto paper, and then come back and play with, is that vocab choice too formal, or do I need to make that a little bit more formal? You can always edit those things, so don't stress about them in your first draft as you're initially writing. Come back and edit them. In your introduction, just like any introduction, you want to allude to your sub-arguments, and this is what will form your body of your essay. And something that is important throughout this public essay is that you tie in the modern day relevance of the concepts that you're talking about. So if you're talking about, I think I've got examples in a couple of slides time, so I'll leave that a second. Moving into the body, you might want to plan how your body section is going to flow before you start writing it, because there is a lot of creative license for you in this task. Obviously, you have to analyze two texts, you have to compare representations, you have to use techniques, but how you structure it is a little bit up to you. So you might want to plan it out first so that you've got a clear outline of how you're going to write. And one of these structures might be a good idea, or you might invent your own. It is entirely up to you, but I wanted to make a suggestion. So the first approach might be that you start by talking about one text, then you talk about another text, then you blend them together. Blending them together is really important. You don't want to spend your whole essay just talking about one text or the other text. That's not going to bring as much nuance into your response. You want to blend them together a little bit. There's an analogy used in some of the course notes that say if text 1 is red and text 1 is blue, you want a little bit of red, a little bit of blue, and a little bit of purple. So mixing those two colors together. The second approach, you might structure each paragraph about a sub-argument, which is one main idea that might make up part of your thesis. So you're breaking down your thesis into little sub-arguments that you can discuss, and in each paragraph you blend both texts into the paragraph. This can feel a little bit complicated to do, and it takes some practice to cohesively integrate both texts into the same paragraph. The third approach that I'm suggesting here is to do a bit of both of these two approaches that are above. So there might be moments where you only talk about one text. There might be a couple of paragraphs that you center around ideas and you talk about both texts. So really just mixing these up and working out what's going to work for you in this essay, depending on what you have to discuss. Whatever way you structure the body of your essay, you should highlight the similarities and differences between the two texts. So coming back to our Venn diagram, our Venn diagram was focusing on the representations of the concepts, but you also want to look at the similarities and differences in structural features and aesthetic features here. So I've got some example sentences. In both texts, money is an inescapable symbol of power. So here I'm talking about a similarity in structural features. In the second example, as a novel, the author of the first text, you would insert the author's name, that's why I've got that in asterisks, can explicitly convey Adam's feelings through his internal monologue, whereas this portrayal of fear hinges entirely on actor's surname, facial expressions in the second text. So you can see here, I'm comparing here the differences in structural features. So in the novel, we have the description of an internal monologue, whereas in the film, we only have an actor's facial expressions to convey emotion. In this case, it's a portrayal of fear. Finally, the final example says both text 1 and text 2 invite the audience to value trust through its necessary role in the characters' adventures. However, text 2 elaborates on this to warn that not everyone can be trusted. So this is looking at representations. There is both a similarity and a difference here. So using clear words, like in both texts, this is a comparative word here, whereas in both texts, however, so we're clearly signposting our similarities and our differences. And the difference here is that the second text elaborates on the representation to warn that not everyone can be trusted. So there's a nuance there in the representation that makes a difference between text 1 and text 2. In your body section, I want you to integrate cultural assumptions, values, attitudes, and beliefs into your body section. This is in the ISMG, this is in your marking criteria. So it's crucial that you integrate cultural assumptions, values, attitudes, and beliefs that are relevant to your concept. So if you're talking about power and the social structure and status, if that's what you're comparing in the two texts, it probably won't be relevant to talk about a cultural attitude towards gender. It probably won't be relevant. We want to talk about the relevant cultural assumptions, values, attitudes, and beliefs. So cultural assumptions is kind of touching on what is normal. The values are what people find important. Attitudes is people's outlook on things, and beliefs is what they think is true. In your body section, you want to refer to the author or director's use of techniques to support your discussion. So you've done all that hard work analysing your two texts, identifying your techniques. Please include discussion of your techniques, and you need to integrate these in a way that is smooth and flowing within your essay. So remembering the genre of this, which is a public audience essay, it's not an analytical essay like your external exam. It's not that level of formality and kind of clinical detachment and academicness. Not a word, but I think you get what I mean. The tone here is different, so you need to integrate those techniques in a way that matches that more light-hearted and conversational approach of the IA2. In your paragraphs, link your sub-arguments back to that modern-day relevance of your concept. And this is what makes it contribute to the conversation, the current conversations around your text, because you're linking the text regardless of when it was written. It could be 200, 300, 400 years ago, it could be 10 years ago, but you're linking your text to a modern issue, which makes it relevant to the reader and provides a broader context around it beyond just its literary significance. So if you're talking about racism in your two texts, you could link this to the Black Lives Matter movement or anti-Asian hate crime epidemic, things that have happened within the last few years. So if you remember it, it's probably around that right time, the 5 to 10 years. In mine, I linked a discussion of survival to, in my IA2, I linked a discussion of survival as my concept to Anzac Day celebrations, because it was around that time. So making it something that is relevant in a modern day setting, and that is your broader context to your piece. Find cohesive ties to connect your paragraphs. So I talk to all my tutoring students about telling a story. And I'm not talking about writing short stories either, I'm talking about in essays. Essays should tell a story. Your 3 or 4 or 5 body paragraphs, however many you write, 3 in a traditional analytical essay. So let's talk about 3 body paragraphs. They should each build on each other to create a bigger picture. So this inherently creates good flow, because the first body paragraph provides the foundation to the second, and the third builds upon the previous 2. So there's a natural flow that is created by sequencing your subject matter in a way that builds on each other. And there are criteria points on the ISMG related to the organization and synthesis of subject matter, and this is part of that, how you organize what you're going to say. Keep your audience in mind, and this is even relevant to paragraph length. So in a more public-facing platform like the conversation, shorter paragraphs are more suitable because they're easier for the broader audience to read and to follow shorter paragraphs than longer paragraphs. Think about what you prefer to read, probably shorter paragraphs that stay central around one key point and then flow nicely to the next paragraph. But if you have an audience which is a more Englishy or literary audience, those longer paragraphs might be more suitable. Denser analysis, more high-level vocabulary. All of this is about tailoring your essay to who you're writing it to, who is going to read it. And your discussion should be approximately 50-50 split across the two texts. So even though there's not lots of guidelines around the structure of the IA2, you should be aiming to hit about 50-50. So you don't want to spend 80% of your IA2 on one of your texts and then only 20% on the other text. You want to split it roughly evenly. It can be just a little bit more or less, but roughly evenly across your two texts. Finally, the conclusion of your public audience essay. Just like a regular conclusion, you want to remind the reader of your thesis from the introduction. So again, rephrasing it, not just copy pasting it, but rephrasing it in a way that re-emphasizes what you were intending to communicate to the audience. Then you want to summarize the arguments from the body. Ideally, the way that you're doing this is not just listing them, but connecting them smoothly. And there's obviously flexibility for how many sentences this takes you. I often just do it in one sentence, but it might make more sense to do it in 2 or 3 sentences. That being said, you don't want to take up too much of your word count in your conclusion. I always talk about the idea of zooming out, not just in your public audience essay, but in all essay conclusions. It is particularly important in your public audience essay, though, to tie back to the modern day relevance of the topic. We've been talking about this all the way through the essay, so it's important that you come back to it at the very end of the conclusion. So and what I mean by zooming out is you just spent the majority of your writing talking about 2 specific texts. And that's very, very zoomed in on a particular part of the topic. Now you want to zoom out to the broader picture, make an impactful and lasting statement on the reader about, in this way, the 2 texts remind readers of the importance of family love and maintaining the strength of these bonds in modern times, especially when life tends to get in the way. So this isn't perfect again, this is off the top of my head, but we're zooming out so that we can remind the reader why they should care and what you want them, if there's any change you want to bring about in their values and their beliefs. So it has the text inspired any changes in the way that they think about the topic. We've talked about this a little bit throughout, and the idea that you need to not write too formally in your public audience essay. I like the idea that your article is a conversation with a really cool teacher, somebody who's up with pop culture. They understand the references that we young people make. And as I said earlier, don't stress about it too much when you write initially, but once you've captured your ideas, play with the vocab, play with the punctuation and the sentence length to find a happy medium where your writing is conversational but still intellectual. You don't want to lose how you're coming across as a writer. You still want to sound smart, but you want to sound smart in a way like you're having a chat with a really cool teacher. I think that's a great analogy. Balance analysis with more light-hearted writing. You can make puns, quote pop culture, use contractions, incomplete sentences, and other intertextual references. So if there's something else out there that you think is really relevant to the discussion, maybe it's a quote from a well-known person, maybe it's a short reference to another film or book that talks similarly on this theme, you can refer to them in your essay. Make it interesting. Make it really dynamic in the way that you write. And there's an example writing there of how to hit that balance. While we might describe our Western culture today as enlightened and progressive, are we really better than the history that has always chained women to convention? There's still an underlying intellectual tone to that writing, but it's a bit more conversational than a normal essay. Finally, you want to make your public essay look like a public audience essay. So you might choose to use some of the following, and they are going to depend a little bit again on that context from the task sheet about where your article is going to be hypothetically published. So certainly you can use images of the book cover, screenshots from the movie, especially if you can get a screenshot of a moment that you're analysing the film techniques for. So if you're talking about the use of colour or lighting or the shot angle, that you can actually have a visual reference of that. You could even input in relevant memes if it's appropriate for the platform. So if it's something like the conversation, that kind of style, if there's a relevant meme, go ahead, make it fun. This is more light-hearted writing. You might choose to format your article in columns, so you'll see this a lot in lots of articles. You can do that on Word, you can make 2 columns. You might use a header behind your title so that your title pops. You could use quote boxes, so you still want to be using evidence from the text. You still want to be finding quotes from the movie and from the book that you can include as evidence for your discussion of representation. But you can make these quotes pop by putting them in a little standout box where the font is bigger. They're still in quotation marks, but the font will be bigger than the rest of the text in the article. Alright, we are up to IA3. We're running well with time. And I'm going to stop talking for a minute. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Grab that Google Doc or pen and paper that you had before, keep it handy. I would like you to do a super short, respond to this super short prompt to get your creative writing flowing out from you again. And I would like you to write as if you are a piece of art hanging on a gallery wall. What do you see from your perspective? Who is in the gallery? What is their reaction to you? It would be cool if you can try and give the audience a sense of what type of art you are or what you depict, but don't tell the audience. Show them through the reactions of the people who are visiting the gallery. Right, I'm going to give you 1 to 2 minutes. Have a little bit of a write. Have a play. There's no pressure. My biggest tip that I'll always talk about with creative writing is using show don't tell. So even with the reactions of the gallery visitors, how can you show their emotion without writing sentences like, he looked angry, he looked surprised by the pain, by me? Do you write, his jaws dropped and his eyebrows raised? He couldn't stop staring at me. Does that convey surprise without telling our reader that the audience is surprised? A couple more seconds. We'll finish up around now. These types of creative prompts, these short prompts where you spend where you spend a certain amount of time writing your response can be really good if you're not in the practice of doing a lot of creative writing recently. They get you back into the flow, and the time pressure encourages you not to overthink what you're writing, just to get some words down on the page. So I'd really encourage you to try to do some of these whenever you have maybe 10 minutes to study English. 10 minutes is a great amount of time to respond to a creative prompt. Let's talk about base text. So straight from QCEE, you have been asked to use your interpretation of a literary text from the prescribed text list as a springboard for an imaginative response. What does that mean? So in class you'll study a text, and we're going to call this the base text. And you'll use it as an inspiration to write your own creative response. And I use those words, creative response, because you can actually choose to write different types of responses, not just a short story, although that's the most common one that students choose and the most familiar. Looking at your base text, so you might get to choose between some different texts to be your base text, or you might just study one base text in class. But whatever you're doing with your analysis of the base text, you need to become very well acquainted with how the author has achieved the effect of your base text. So when it comes to write your creative response, the task is to provoke an emotional response in your audience. Think pathos. The first step to be able to do this is to actually have a good relationship with your base text, your inspiration, because the author of this base text knows really, really well how to influence the audience. You need to identify how they do that. Is it the characters that they've constructed, the aesthetic features, the relationships, the setting, the plot events? I could go on. There's so many choices that authors make that shape the way we view and react to text, and that's what you need to be able to identify to help you write your own response inspired by the base text. So some things to identify from the base text are the key concepts, so the themes and ideas which influence the emotional response felt by the reader. And you also should look at the characters that the author has developed. These are really renowned literary texts that have been chosen on the prescribed text list. So the author will have constructed some really interesting, complex, intriguing characters. And that should prompt you to wonder how you're going to do this in your creative response. And a good way to write a good character is to be able to explain what your character wants and what they're willing to do to get this. So going back to Frozen, Anna just wants her sister back. She's willing to trek all the way up the North Mountain through crazy ice storms, past wolves, and literally learn to climb a mountain in the snow to get to her sister. She's willing to confront that danger to be able to fulfill her goal. Maybe your character really wants something, but they're not that willing to do that much to get it. They're scared, or they're anxious, or they're just really passive in their reactions. So these are all things that you need to know about your character beyond just their name and how they look and their age and basic character profiling like that, which is also really helpful. But those two questions of what your character wants and what they're willing to do to get it will really shape a complex character. As I prefaced just before, many of you will choose to write a short story for your IO3, and there is nothing wrong with that. You're probably most familiar with how to write short stories, and it's great to play to your strengths. However, just to keep the door open and all the possibilities on the table, you could also write a letter, a series of letters, or a diary entry. You could write a speech, you could write a scene from a play, you could even write an excerpt from a film script. So there's a lot of variety and options here if you choose to take them. So you can talk to your teacher about these options. They might have some suggestions and guidance here as well. Even if you have another idea for a different type of creative response you'd like to write, run it by your teacher. They will give you the best guidance when it comes to what's achievable and what fits the brief of your task. It's important to note that each of these different forms, so letters, diary entries, speeches, plays, they all have specific genre conventions that you must be aware of and include in your response. So we were talking about plays just earlier, and they have stage directions. So you would need to write stage directions into your creative response if you were going to write a scene from a play. You need to be really confident about what these conventions are and how to correctly write them into your response. And that's why a lot of students opt for a short story, and I totally understand why. There are ways to kind of shake it up with your short stories as well though. So the most common structure is to follow a linear story. So events occur in the order that they actually happen. Sorry about the wording issue there. So events occur in the order that they would actually happen in real life. So yeah, there's no jumping around in the timeline. The timeline just follows from the start straight through to the end. That's our linear. Non-linear timelines or structures is when there are jumps forward or back in time. So I've read lots of books with flashbacks. This is our normal linear timeline, and then the story will jump back to tell you about something back here and then jump forward again. They don't stay in the past, but there's something from the past that it's important you know as a reader. Something that happened that provides some crucial information about the story, about the character, about their history. Flash forwards do the opposite thing. They jump forward in time and they jump back. They're a lot less common and probably more difficult to write, I would say. Circular stories, let me just go down here. This is actually more common than you would think. Circular stories still go in like a linear direction, but wherever the characters were at the start, they return to at the end. So very, very common in kind of adventure and fantasy, and maybe even some sci-fi novels where there's some kind of quest that a character starts in their normal world, they venture out of this world, complete their quest, and they end up back in their normal world. This is a circular story. Parallel stories, challenging to pull off, but this is when we have multiple storylines occurring at the same time. Frame stories are when we have a separate story within a story. So maybe your character is a writer and we have snippets of the story that they're writing within the story of the author, if that makes sense. I have heard of some of these books. I don't know if I've read one of these. If you were going to go for any of these in your IA3, I would suggest, obviously linear is the default option. Maybe flashbacks would be achievable. Maybe a circular story would be achievable. If you are a seasoned and confident writer, you could attempt any of these and always ask for feedback from people around you, from your teacher. They can give you some verbal feedback if you talk about your idea to them, things like that, just to check that you're on the right track. I'm sure you've all heard of a sizzling start. That's why I've got a picture of a fried pan, because stories that start with a description of places or people or objects, they're boring and they take up too much time in your short word count, where you need to be showing off your prowess as a writer. So start when the action happens, or a sizzling start. What does that actually mean? Let's look at some examples. We can have an introduction or an exposition that mean the same things, where we get the audience curious. The snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. That is from The Secret History, and I think just reading that, I haven't read this book, I think just reading that, you get so intrigued. What are they doing? They're on the mountains, and who's Bunny and why's Bunny died? It's really intriguing. Your introduction might introduce your key themes or ideas. This introduction is a little more dense, A Tale of Two Cities, but you can see the introduction of ideas here. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. There's contradiction and an exploration of kind of life and the opposite moments that we have in it. The introduction can grab our attention similarly to getting us curious. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It's very, very cleverly written. It's a short sentence, but it's really interesting. Our introduction can set the events in motion. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the potholes. So this sets off a chain of events within the novel of Animal Farm. Finally, your introduction can and will likely orient your reader with the narrator or the protagonist, main character, whatever we want to call them. When he was nearly 13, my brother Jem got his arm badly broken at the elbow. So we immediately are immersed within the narrator's family for To Kill a Mockingbird. And then with this introduction from The Catcher in the Rye, if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield, but I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. So we see that this character has had a challenging past, but they have kind of detached from it, and that really sets up the characterization. Final slide on our IA3s. Some students struggle to see how to springboard from their base text to their creative response, and there's a variety of ways you can do that. Ideally, you do more than one of these dot points that I'm about to talk through. Ideally, you do a couple of them, and that will give you a really strong connection between your base text and your creative response. So you might want to incorporate, you'll want to elaborate on or challenge a view or value from the base text. Definitely. You could adapt a character or characters from the base text in a different context. So you could take a character from your base text and put them in a different time period or a different setting, or just in an environment that they were not in the base text. You could expand on a minor character's experiences to provide their perspective. So there's lots of minor characters in all of the texts we consume, and their experiences aren't really highlighted, or they're not the focus of the stories we read. But we could choose to really highlight their experiences by maybe making them our protagonist and giving their thoughts on something that happened in the novel, or something hypothetical. But yes, we can expand on minor characters. You can transfer or translate similar structural features. So if your base text had a really good metaphor or some really clear symbolism or imagery, you can kind of reuse and reimagine those same structural features and aesthetic features in your creative response. You'll want to look at the themes from the base text and how you can represent those in your creative response, how you can agree with or challenge the author's representation of them. You can intervene in the events of the base text to reimagine them. So what if, those what if questions, what if they had made a different choice? What if asking that question allows you to take something that happened in the base text and reimagine how the events could have unfolded if something different was changed from the choices the author made for the characters in the base text. You might choose to include a short phrase or slightly adjust a short phrase to include from the base text into your response to emphasize the connection. So in my I3 creative response, my base text was a poem, and it talked about a lady on a train and she had a slip of paper in her hands. And the question I asked was, where was she going? What was the slip of paper? And that's what I wrote my story about. And at the end of my short story, I included the phrase impossibly departed, which was from the original base text. This emphasized the connection. I also drew in many of the same views, values, and themes from the base text. We're moving on to our final topic, which is to look way ahead to the external exam. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Go back to your pen and paper or your Google Doc or your phone notes app to write down as many structural and aesthetic features as you can think of. Alright, hopefully you've got a few down. Some students have a really strong and wide knowledge of structural and aesthetic features. For some students, this is an area that I'd really encourage you to work on, and it's a great way to have a strong foundation and preparation for your external exam. It might feel far away now, but your external exam, it's the dreaded external. It can be anxiety causing and it will approach quicker than you want or expect. So I wanted to equip you with some skills and habits to ensure you are prepared as best as possible when the end of year rolls around. So a really key skill for external exam essay writing is being able to write a clear and concise thesis. So I encourage you to practice thesis writing, look at resources that help you to structure and think through the process of writing a thesis. You're writing a thesis for your I2, so that's good practice as well. As your external exams approach, practice these, get feedback on them from teachers, tutors, peers, anyone who kind of knows what a thesis is. Build your knowledge, as I was mentioning before, build your knowledge of structural and aesthetic features. So you could make a bit of a dictionary of structural and aesthetic features, where you make a list of what they are, like the name of them and what they are, and maybe an example of them from a text. And that is the first step. It's going to help you identify them. You also need to practice identifying them in text so that you can think about the purpose and the reason they're being used. What purpose are they providing in the text, and how are they being used by the author? It seems a little strange, but It's very helpful in your external exam if you can write in a way that's really clear and legible for the examiner. So you can spend some time developing a handwriting style that's really clear and still quick to write. So if you practice doing lots of handwriting this year in Year 12, you will not disappoint. It's a good use of your time in class. If you want to take your notes by hand, then you're giving yourself an advantage in your external exams. Building on from that, you could also give yourself some spelling tests of key vocab words. Verbs like illuminates, eventuates, showcases, making sure you can spell some of those really nice vocab choices. It will also cement those words in your head. Practice editing. Editing is a skill. You don't have a lot of time in the external exam, but being able to give yourself a couple minutes at the end of the exam to edit your piece of writing is really crucial and very much recommended. So if you practice editing throughout the year, then you're going to be really efficient at it at the end of year. So those are all things you can do when you don't really know your external exam text. Once you do begin studying the text for your external exam though, these are some of the tasks that you can do then. So as you're reading your text, you want to annotate it or make notes. So annotating being on the text itself. If it's a school copy of a book, you probably can't do that. Give yourself a dedicated notebook. Use the page numbers, write down quotes as you go. As you're reading and analysing, make sure you understand the historical or social, cultural or political context for the text, because this is where your cultural assumptions, values, attitudes and beliefs will stem from that you need to include in your essay writing. So if you understand them, if you understand this context as you read the text and how it's relevant to the plot and the characters and the themes, you're going to be in really good stead. As you read, collect quotes. If you leave this until the end, then you kind of have to read the whole thing again to find some of the quotes. As you get closer to the external exam and you're memorizing your quotes, try to pick ones that relate to a few different themes and or characters. The more versatile your quotes are, the less quotes you have to memorize. And it's never fun trying to memorize quotes for the exam. So try to pick selectively, be purposeful, that you're covering all the themes and characters, but you're picking quotes that relate to multiple themes and or characters, so you can use them in a number of different prompts. Make mind maps. I was really into my mind maps, and I did them for all the different themes in my external exam was on Macbeth, so I did lots of different mind map posters on ambition, violence, guilt, gender, all different the supernatural, another concept in Macbeth, and I would include my analysis, my quotes, my cultural assumptions, values, attitudes and beliefs. So it's a great way of compiling all your thoughts. Practice making essay plans in 15 minutes and try to find unseen prompts to do your essay plans on. This is simulating the exam conditions. So you're giving yourself the best advantage because you're going to be prepared for what it feels like under time pressure with an unseen prompt. And then probably the most intensive of all these tasks is to write some practice essays. Write them in the exam time, so 2 hours of handwriting. Focus on connecting your ideas back to your thesis. So sometimes this can get a little lost within the pressure of the time and the need to analyze your text, but each paragraph needs to clearly connect back to the thesis from your introduction. And you also should focus on clearly explaining the logic of your arguments in your paragraphs. So make sure you're not making any leaps of logic or assumptions about what the reader understands about your analysis. Key things to practice in your essay, or to know that you're going to need to include in your essay: a thesis will go in your introduction. It's your stance, your position, or your argument. It answers the prompt questions. So you can choose to use some of the same vocab words that the prompt gives you to help make it a clear and direct answer to the prompt. You're going to need evidence in your paragraphs in the form of key quotes, as we discussed. You're going to need to refer to structural and aesthetic features in your paragraphs. The analysis is your thinking, your interpretation to unpack the evidence. What does it mean, and how does it support your thesis? And finally, how is the author positioning the reader? So if you're analysing something a particular way, what does this prompt the audience to think, feel, or react to? We're winding down for this essay, for this lecture, sorry. You can tell it's been a jam-packed 2 hours, and I've just got a few top tips for acing Year 12 before we finish. I encourage you to set specific goals for your study sessions. If you just write that you're going to study English, you might feel a bit lost and unproductive, but try to set very specific tasks, like read 3 chapters of my IO2 novel, or 15 minutes practicing creative writing. This will help you be really efficient and productive. Also helping you to be productive is to schedule your studies strategically, and also schedule breaks. So work out when you're most productive during the day. Maybe it's early morning, maybe it's after lunch, maybe you're more of an afternoon, evening studier. I know I am. So schedule to study then, take breaks at other times in the day, and try to get away from those Year 12 stresses a little bit. Be kind to yourself when you need to adapt your plans. So I've just told you to make plans, but sometimes if you're really tired or you're feeling burnt out, it won't help to push yourself to work in those times. So make plans, but be flexible and ready to adapt them, and show compassion to yourself when you need a break. Set goals and celebrate completing them. So when you complete those little tasks in your study sessions and you feel super productive, go and celebrate, have a meal out with friends or some coffee, watch some Netflix after finishing a chapter review, or if you like going for a run or going to the gym, use that as a reward as well. Great to get active and moving too. Finally, just to believe in yourself. A positive outlook and the belief that you can and will achieve what you put your mind to will go far. And I 100% believe in that for you. You can and will achieve what you put your mind to this year. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've got a lot out of this lecture, or even just 1 or 2 skills that will help you feel more confident in English this year. I am absolutely cheering for you all. I hope you enjoy every moment of this year. Try to step back from the stress and appreciate everything you accomplish and all of the experiences you have. So please seek out support from all the different sources you can. Talk to your teacher, your peers, use online resources like ATAR Notes or ATAR Notes Plus, or even seek out a tutor like myself at TubeMax. Thank you so much again for joining me today, and really just all the best this year. Bye!